Hello, everybody. I'm going to get started here. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We have two hearings on the agenda today. I am the chair of the Transportation Committee, Councilman Ryan Dorsey from the 3rd District. We're joined here today by the fellow members of the committee, Vice Chair Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, and member of the committee, Dr. John Bullock from the 9th District. We are joined here by a variety of other folks from various agencies, both city and state. Thank you so much, MTA, for being here. We have representatives from the school system. Thank you, Dr. Santelises. And I'm just going to ask that everybody just introduce themselves as they come up, to when they're speaking. In my communications with our guests and participants from MTA and BCPS, I had iterated that we were going to do these hearings in one order, and then they were announced kind of in the other order. I'm going to stick to the order that we had previously discussed. So we're going to talk about MTA service funding, service changes, and funding, and a variety of things with MTA first, and then we're going to move on to Councilman Pinkett's resolution on the discussion of impacts to students and school transportation. So I do have to officially first I'm going to gavel in one, and then I'm going to put it in recess, and then we're going to come back to it, just to be technically all in order here. So we're going to open up the hearing on Bill 20-0242R, Councilman Pinkett's resolution, but we're going to take that directly into recess here and begin. It is now 3:05, the announced time for legislative oversight 20-0085 to discuss generally the changes in service to MTA. Thank you so much, Kevin, Administrator Quinn from the MTA, Holly Arnold. Who else do we have here from MTA?
Councilman, we also have Sean Adgerson, Chief Operating Officer, and I believe we also have Tom Hewitt, our Director of the Office of Service Development.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Just a couple words here, just on my intent. I want to be clear. Let me take a look here. I haven't looked to see how many viewers, attendees we may have here. We have 56 participants on here, so I want to welcome everybody from the public who is in attendance. We have some folks calling in on the phone, listening. We have a couple folks from media. I see Colin Campbell from The Sun here. And so I'm just really glad that we're able to create this forum to have this discussion. Again, over the last year and a half, couple of years now, I've just been really thankful to have MTA willing to come in and have these kind of discussions with us. So you're certainly under no obligation to report to the City Council. So I just am very thankful for your partnership and participation. That said, I also want to just acknowledge, I know that we're all facing very challenging times. We here at the city are going to be facing some massive funding shortfalls from what we had previously budgeted. I mean, we faced a budget this year where we had to basically scrap a whole budget at the last minute, and the Budget Bureau had to basically rewrite a new budget and run that through the Board of Estimates before it could come to the City Council. COVID is impacting us all dramatically, and the state has certainly not escaped its path. And I know that these changes that have been announced recently to take place in January are, as a direct result of that. And they don't come easily to MTA. I have the utmost respect for MTA's leadership, and in particular, if I may speak freely, the hard decisions that are handed down to them from MDOT. MTA, has people that say, "Look, here's what you're going to have to do." And so I know that's challenging, and I know there are going to be some questions about how MTA is faring in this compared to some of the other modal agencies under MDOT. I know that that's a particular question that I know will come up. But I just want to make sure that we're all really respectful of the delineation of what MTA is kind of handed to do, and not conflate that with the tough decisions that MTA has to do, having been handed cuts. And so I know I also want to acknowledge we have some folks from DOT here. Thank you also. Liam Davis, Charles Penny. We have some folks from the mayor's office, Matt Stegman, and from the council president's office, Dominic McAlilly. So I'm going to ask, and we have the city council's general counsel, Rebecca Simmons, as well as Vic Tervola from the city law department. And I want to acknowledge our committee staff, Jennifer Coates, always pulling things together for us. Thank you, Jennifer. MTA, Kevin, you guys have a presentation you want to go through. And Jennifer, can we give them screen sharing privileges so that they can directly control their slides and whatnot?
Yes, I will do that now.
Okay, great. Who's gonna run that, Kevin?
I think that's going to be me.
All right, great.
All right, are we? Okay, great. So I'm now the presenter. That's come up. That's great.
All right.
Perfect. It's always great when the technology works out. It always feels like a miracle. So let me just go ahead and get started. And I just want to note a couple things before I get going. I've got about 20 slides. I promise I won't take too long. I'll try to zip through this. But I do want to just note a few things at the outset. And one is that, when we started 2020, MTA as an agency, as an organization, as a leadership team was really excited to continue the improvements that we've talked to this city council about in improvements to on-time performance and real-time tracking on our modes and transit app and mobile ticketing and a lot of the improvements that we've made, as well as many of the capital projects. And I don't think any of us could have predicted that we'd sit here 9 months later kind of having this conversation and with the state and with MDOT facing the significant revenue shortfall that's just unlike anything we've ever seen. And so as a result of these record declines, the overall MDOT operating budget is being reduced by about $98 million, and we certainly have our piece to this. That's put us and our riders certainly in a really difficult position with some very difficult decisions to make. And so I want to note that, MDOT does not sit here as an opposing side trying to convince you that these cuts are okay. They are impactful. And I think what I do want to convey, though, is the seriousness of the budget situation that we face, MDOT and MTA face. And I do want to convey the approach that we've taken, which is really to do the sort of the least amount of harm and to be sensitive and to propose changes in a responsible way that also respect a public comment process. And that's essentially as kind and as compassionate as we can be in proposing these types of changes. You all have worked with me, you've worked with Holly and Sean and my staff, and I think you all know that we're believers in transit and the good work that transit can do and that it does for the Baltimore community. So I just wanted to note that from the outset. Let me grab, I think it's this one. Let's see if this works. Nope, that's not it. That's not it at all. Let's try that one more time. Give me 1 second here. Nope. Nope.
Mr. Quinn, this is
Yeah.
Jennifer Coates. I have your presentations. If you'd like me to, I can pull them up for sharing and you
Great.
can present.
Why don't you do that? That'd be great.
Okay.
While it's getting pulled up, just real quick, I want to ask, I should have done this at the outset. I'm a bad chairperson. Often I forget to acknowledge people, but I also I was proud that I acknowledged my colleagues here on the council first, but I do want to give them an opportunity if there's anything introductory that either the vice chair or Councilman Bullock would like to say here at the outset. I see Councilman Bullock declining. Vice Chair Pinkett, anything you want to just kind of throw in here as we get started?
No, I mean, I think the presentation is ready, so we can proceed. I'll just add something at the end. Thank you, Doc.
Oh, great, thanks.
Okay. You can go ahead and jump forward, I think, a couple slides. Go ahead and go one more. Just talk about revenue impact for a second. So, we're not the first in the nation to be proposing cuts. Transit agencies nationwide are facing service reductions. Covid-19, as you know, has resulted in this major decline of the Transportation Trust Fund. Just to kind of talk globally for a second, there's about a $550 million revenue decline for fiscal year 20 that ended on June 30th, and between 490 and 560 million for FY21. Now, we did receive about 392 million in CARES Act funding. That has been really critical to allow us to maintain service for essential employees, but I'll note that will be fully expended by the end of September. So as a result of this, FY21 requires MDOT to reduce its total operating budget by 98 million and reduce the capital budget by nearly $2 billion. Go to the next slide, please.
Oh, boy. Hold on a moment.
There it is. Great. So talking about MTA kind of specifically, COVID-19 resulted in an additional 27 million in unanticipated operating expenses. So that's PPE for our operators, that's cleaning of buses and trains, and other safety measures that we put in place that were not included in our original budget. So we had to spend 27 on top of what we had before. In addition, in order to meet budget reductions, we needed to reduce our operating budget for FY21 by 43 million. So combined with our additional COVID spending, that's a total operating budget reduction that we had to make of $70 million. Capital budget had a reduction of 150. And so on the left-hand side, I wanted to present, Councilman Dorsey, I think you brought up, how the impact was on other modes, other business units. And so you can see the impact on TSO, MVA, MAA, MPA, MTA, and SHA, and you can all see kind of the percent decline as well as the dollar amount in operating reductions. And on the capital budget side, you can see that SHA took the bulk of the hit with nearly 1.3 billion in capital decline, and ours is about 460 million when looked at over the 6-year program. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Hold on, please.
Okay. So, we haven't been silent in all this. I've been MDOT's been really trying to be an active advocate for additional federal funding. Back in July, I signed a letter with 26 other transit CEOs to congressional leadership requesting funding, highlighting the consequences, what would happen if we didn't get the funding we needed. I also signed an August 6th letter with 23 other CEOs focused on commuter rail, again requesting funding. We've been frequent advocates to the Maryland Congressional Delegation, really urging support for additional funding for transit. We continue to do that regularly. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So our proposed service plan approach, you can keep on going. So I want to just note that our service plan approach really focuses on meeting these budgetary challenges that I just outlined, but it's also focused on maintaining high quality, frequent service on high ridership routes. We also looked at reducing kind of redundant or kind of overlapping service, but we also wanted to alter routes to maintain as much coverage as possible. So for example, if there's a route that's proposed for elimination, and we had the ability to extend one route to cover that gap, we tried to do that. And so you'll see that there are some route modifications in our proposal, and a lot of times that was to close some of those gaps. Rather than really focus on system-wide cuts, again, as an approach, which might result in very infrequent, unreliable service to all riders, our approach is really maintaining frequent service on our most frequently utilized routes, which also includes those that have continued to see strong ridership during COVID-19. Again, the approach really ensuring that transit is available and reliable for those that are really that are depending on it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've used a lot of data. You all know I'm very data focused, and we looked at ridership trends before and during COVID-19, travel and demographic data. We also wanted to limit overcrowding. You know, there are systems across the country that are just kind of taking sort of an across the board service cut. They just say, you know, we're just going to cut 20% of the service on all routes. But the problem is that that approach can result in overcrowding. And the last thing that we want to do is sort of intentionally create overcrowding situations during COVID. So that was also a key piece of data for us. We wanted to be equitable with this plan and taking a look at service for those who depend on it. And I guess I would just say in general, this kind of second sub-bullet is a very good kind of summary statement of our approach, which is that the system becomes much more focused on serving Baltimore City and major job centers with much fewer suburban routes really coming into the city. Another key piece of this was avoiding employee layoffs. Other agencies nationwide, North America, across the world have been laying off employees. We really didn't want to do that. And so what we've proposed avoids employee layoffs at MTA. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So our methodology focuses on 5 key things. Public comments, really important to us, incorporating feedback from riders and operators. We also focused a lot on our frequent transit network. So many of you may know that those are routes that provide 15-minute or better service. I'll also just note that those frequent transit network routes carry 2/3 of all of our passengers. And so those are kind of the backbone of our system. And that frequent transit network actually expands from currently 18 routes running at those 15-minute or better frequencies to 20 routes. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. From an accessibility standpoint, we need to maintain access to people really across the disability spectrum, hospitals and other essential services, and really trying to avoid large geographic gaps in service and kind of creating transit deserts. We took a look at efficiency and those routes with low ridership or duplicative service, and also, of course, equity, maintaining access to riders that have high transit propensity, including those that are low income, minority, and car-free households as well. That's a key piece for us. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to kind of dive into it, you know, under what we've proposed, 98% of riders retain transit access within a quarter mile.
Next time, I got my calls full with it to my cell phone.
I think somebody's not muted, but
Jennifer, I think that's you.
Oh. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Jennifer, you're helping us out. It's all good. So, you know, I want to note that the local bus route kind of realignments, reductions that we've proposed do result in an overall service reduction of about 20% of our overall service hours and service miles. But that said, you still have 98% of riders that have access to transit within a quarter mile. Eliminated stops are going to affect about 7,500 riders. That's about 3.5% of our overall system ridership, while about 56% of those affected by those eliminated stops, again, still have access within a quarter mile. So we've really focused on access. The frequent transit network, as I noted, goes from 18 to 20 routes. The frequent transit routes that increase include the local link 56 and the local link 78. The 56 essentially goes from 20 to 15-minute headways. That results in an additional 32,000 residents and 12,000 jobs that are now within a quarter mile of the frequent transit network. You see a 7% increase in minority residents and 5% increase in low-income households that now have access to the frequent transit network within a quarter mile. Again, really focusing on the core. It'll serve an additional 6 schools, 2 community service facilities, 1 medical facility, and again, that expanded frequent transit network is only a third of our routes, 20 routes, that does carry 2/3 of all of our riders. We still see medical centers, 45 of 47 grocery stores that retain access. We've also worked with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council to do some initial modeling. And what it's showing us is that the transfer rate is projected to roughly stay the same with 49 trips being served with a 1-seat ride. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I don't mean to kind of jump the gun to talk about school service, but I do want to note, and happy to repeat this again in the following hearing, that any city schools today that have school trippers will have trippers in the future. And just a refresher on what a tripper is, we run fixed route service. Our trippers is kind of a deviation or a branch off of that fixed route to go serve a middle school or high school. Those trippers may be different from routes under the current system, but we're absolutely committed to working with BCPSS to ensure that schools have adequate transit access when they return to in-person learning. We're going to get more into that. Some of the current service provides a quarter-mile access to 261 schools and educational facilities. The proposed service is 235, a drop of 26 facilities. Go ahead and go to the next one. I want to show kind of an image of what this looks like graphically. Again, the service proposal really focuses on Baltimore City major job centers with fewer suburban routes coming in. The yellow is the service area that we maintain under the proposal. With the red line in gray are areas that do lose service. I'm not going to read all those out. I will also note that service to Annapolis is proposed for discontinuation as part of our proposal. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The next slide just kind of shows this a little differently, with the green being those routes that stay, the red dash, the routes that are eliminated. And again, the service proposal maintains frequent service on the highest ridership routes, and that's been a big focus of ours. And I'll be happy to send this PowerPoint along kind of when we're done. I know I'm cruising through this because I know we have limited time. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I don't want to forget a couple other pieces of our proposal. One is on Commuter Bus, where we are proposing an overall service reduction of about 10%. We're proposing to discontinue some trips on 20 different routes with low ridership across the state, and to completely discontinue 2 routes due to low ridership. That's an overall reduction of 10%. And then go to the next slide on MARC. We're looking, generally speaking, to discontinue trains with low ridership, which is an overall service reduction of about 14% on the Camden line, 7% on Penn between Baltimore and DC, and 23% between Perryville and Baltimore. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The public hearing process, and go ahead and go to the next slide. Before I go into this, I'll just note that Commuter Bus and MARC are on a separate public hearing proposal schedule. Those are dealt differently. We're still working out the public hearings for Commuter Bus and MARC services. So as it relates to core bus, public input is key for us. Feedback is really crucial as we finalize the proposal. We have put out rider guides available on our vehicles. And we're looking at a variety of other places to distribute those, such as library pickup sites. They can be mailed upon request. If any elected officials would like some of the rider guides, happy to print some and get them to your offices to distribute as well. I saw your hand there, noted. Announcements are being made on vehicles and signs posted at stops and stations. We're really trying to work with our local and state officials, advocates, and organizations. We want to gather as much feedback as we plan, and of course, when it's implemented, we'll be monitoring ridership levels and really the impact of those reductions to ensure the safe delivery of service. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to talk about the public hearing process, we are, again, we're following our traditional public hearing process to be sure that really kind of all voices are heard and that there's enough time. So we'll be holding public hearings for moving forward with any proposed service changes. There'll be 10 virtual public hearings taking place between October 5th and October 16th. We've done these at a variety of times and days to be sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. Again, Mark and Commuter Bus will be holding virtual public hearings this fall. We can also get comments by email and mail at hearing comments at mta.maryland.gov with written testimony as the subject line, or it can be mailed to 6 St. Paul Street at our MTA Office of Customer and Community Relations. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Last slide just kind of goes through the timeline for all the proposed changes for public comment. So we put out our proposal September 1st. We have the 10 hearings from October 5th through October 16th. Public comment closes 30 days after that last public hearing on November 16th. We'll be doing analysis throughout the public comment period. We've even received many comments, even as of today, that we're analyzing. We'll be announcing those final service changes on November 30th, with a service change going into effect on January 3rd. So that's a kind of a quick overview of our approach of the budgetary impact on MDOT and on MTA, and an overview of the timeline and the process that we're now on. And I'm happy to take any questions and at this time.
Thank you. I appreciate you breezing through that, but really covering a lot of ground there. I have a number of questions I kind of prepared, and some of it I've kind of pour over because you've answered a lot of the things that
Sure.
I wanted to ask about. But one of the things that you touched on is you said 98% of riders will continue to have bus access within a quarter mile of their home. I guess
Yes.
is that their home or their job and their job?
That's their residence. That's their home.
It's from their home.
Yep.
And so I guess is access to destinations factored into that? You said that you focused on, with the routes being the routes that are cut or the lines that are truncated. You try to focus on cutting redundancy and low frequency, but do we have any understanding of not beyond access from your home to a bus, what these cuts are going to mean in terms of access to destinations?
Yeah, so our analysis is primarily based on boarding data, so that could be home or business. I will note that I gave kind of some access numbers regarding educational institutions and which of those have access, and I primarily focused on those because I knew schools was going to be a piece of it. But happy to pull out and send a separate analysis on access to job centers that's maintained and things like that. Which has been a big focus of ours, is maintaining access to job centers. So I guess we try to look at it as both sides. 98% retain access to transit within a quarter mile of their residence. We also try to look at where they're going as well, and those businesses, to be sure those have access as well. And again, this primarily focused on those educational institutions.
And of those 98% who continue to have a quarter mile access, how many of those people are facing reduced service with longer headways and such?
Yeah, so we're trying to get a handle on that now. I noted that we are working with BMC to do some modeling, and so the transfer rate remains the same with the one-seat rides. 49% of trips are still one-seat rides. But we're going to continue to do some analysis to understand exactly what you're getting at.
And with those one-seat rides, is there like an average commute time for those one-seat rides? I mean, how many people are still, hitting like the 45-minute, transit commute time?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but happy to do that analysis.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people are gonna really. That's how a lot of people are gonna understand the impact overall. How
Sure.
long is it gonna? How long? Am I gonna be able to get to my destinations
Yep.
realistically? How long is it gonna take me to get there?
Sure.
I want to, yeah.
Sorry, I think so. Tom Hewitt. Tom's our director of service development. Tom, are you on the line? Tom may not be participating. So we're doing analysis on that, and we will get you that. Okay,
great. Oh, I see Tom. He's like in this like ghostly kind of gray netherworld. It's pretty rad, actually. It's very Tom too.
It sounds very Tom.
It's very Tom. So you're working on that. I get you. I want to go. I have some other questions about kind of the funding breakdown. How MTA is being hit. You had a slide about that. I want to get into that just a little bit more. But I want to go to my colleagues here on the committee and allow them an opportunity. Do you guys want to jump in here?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Dorsey. I did want to, but first of all, I want to say, based upon the presentation, it looks like Mr. Quinn, you and your staff done an incredible job of responding to the shortfalls and trying your best to provide a high level of coverage and service despite the challenges. And so I commend you and your entire team for that. One of the things that, and I think Chairman Dorsey was kind of talking about this, but I just want to bring it out just a little bit further, sure. Is that while, once again, while you talked about 98%, you still would be within a quarter of a mile. You talked about the fact that we're not trying to have buses that are overcrowded. I'm kind of just under this current, dynamic that we're under with the limited vehicle capacity. What does that really mean to the commuter? I might be adjacent to a line, but if I can't get on that bus or the next bus or the following bus, I mean, what does that really mean to me? Even if the line is still close. And I didn't really see that in the presentation, and maybe I might have missed that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think you're hitting right on what Councilman Dorsey was kind of getting at, which is the impact to folks that they 98% still have access to a line within a quarter mile. Our analysis right now, as it stands, doesn't look at is that the line they need? Was the line that they were using now removed, but they do have quarter mile access to some line, and now it's going to require a transfer and therefore may take longer. I think some of the initial BMC analysis data is showing that the travel time is relatively staying the same. But I think that's something that we're still diving into, kind of that more individual neighborhood by neighborhood impact, which is, I think, what you're getting at, really critical to understand before moving forward with these types of changes.
So when you say travel time, does travel time mean when I leave my house and then I get to my destination, or is it when I get to the bus stop and then get to my destination?
I think BMC has.
Well, when I get on the bus and then get to my destination, or is it when I leave my house and get to the destination, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Holly, I think you've been closer to the BMC analysis of exactly how they look at that from door to door or bus stop to bus stop. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Looks like I was just unmuted. So we're looking at kind of overall average travel time. So we don't have the individual data for each individual person who's riding. Unfortunately, we don't have tap on, tap off data. We have when people are getting on. So we're working with BMC to look at origins and destinations. So, from Cherry Hill to, a destination where using their travel demand model, they know a lot of those folks go. So Cherry Hill to downtown, what is the travel time there? And what is the percent increase or decrease within 45 minutes in terms of their access? So we're looking at that through a variety of neighborhoods, a variety of destinations, and calculating what the difference of that is. So we're still working through a lot of that. And as Kevin mentioned too, some of this too, we hear when we start working with the public, right? Like that's when we get the responses from people as to what the individual impacts are going to be, and we can take those into consideration as we're looking through this proposal.
So when you say you're still looking through it, so for example, if I'm a rider and now because of the cuts or limited frequency of the buses, I'm at a bus stop and the limited capacity of the bus. It might take me 2 or 3 buses to actually get on one. And I mean, I'm assuming that that's a real situation for someone. Is that a part of your analysis? And if it is, what is your analysis saying?
So we're looking at the scheduled routes, right? So assuming that you're able to get on the bus when it's scheduled. So, I mean, I think your point of if there's overcrowding or if due to social distancing, there's pass-ups, right. That's not something that unfortunately we're able to model just because we don't necessarily have that data.
But we are able to look at, when that bus is scheduled to arrive from that point forward.
Right, but like if it was the reverse and you were trying to figure out whether there needed to be more buses on a line, you would look at that data, wouldn't you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have boarding data from our passenger counters on the buses to be able to analyze, certain buses, certain times of day where we're seeing overcrowding conditions and be able to augment. We've done that during COVID. We, if you recall, we initially had some service reductions and we put service back in on several of the lines that initially had some overcrowding issues. I will note that, we are today still at just about 60% of our ridership capacity, yet we're delivering the same or more service. So, we're not at that 100% of ridership that we were at 9 months ago, and so we are still able, for the most part, to handle that capacity.
Okay. And what percentage? Well, I'll save my school questions for later.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chairman.
And Mr. Chair, I had a couple questions that are also a bit of a follow-up on Councilman Pinkett, some of the points that were made earlier. So one point that you made, I do appreciate you talking about the wait times and the map of the coverage. That's pretty helpful. And then also just following up on the travel guides, I'm also interested in terms of trying to share that information with constituents. But also, how else are you publicizing some of these changes to the routes? That's the first question, and I have a couple bits of follow-up after that.
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. So we've done notifications of our service proposal and public hearing on all of our buses. There are car cards on the buses that went up on light rail, metro vehicles, light rail stops, metro stations. To date, we've sent out about 4,000 rider guides. Those are going in kind of the brochure boxes of the buses, as well as at metro and light rail. We have those available at 6 St. Paul Street at our headquarters as well. And we just actually got permission to start to distribute those rider guides at the Enoch Pratt and Baltimore County Library. So as people are picking up books, they're going to drop a rider guide in there so that people picking up books will have that information. We're also looking at the team putting up notices at some major bus hubs, West Baltimore, Bayview, the Arena, Mondawmin. So that's in the works as well. It won't be at every single bus stop, but we're trying to get them at the major bus hubs. So and if you have other suggestions of places to send them out, we're all ears and happy to do that.
Much appreciated. And then the other question, so it goes back to what you just mentioned about the passenger counters. So I was always curious how that worked, because anecdotally, I happened to be passing through a neighborhood and I saw a gentleman who was waiting for a bus, and it seemed like the bus passed him by. And so my question is, was that are these things based upon the passenger counters? Is it, gotten to our capacity so we have to pass you by? Or if you could just kind of talk us through how that operation works.
Sure. So let me try Tom Hewitt again, because those passenger counters are under his purview.
Can you hear me now?
There he is. There's Tom.
Success. Okay.
Wow.
I may still look old-timey, but at least you can hear me.
Yes, we can see you through the gray ether, but go ahead.
So yeah, so these are all great questions. And to go back on the overcrowding and how we looked at the reduced route service. So we really took an approach where, like Kevin said, we didn't want to induce any type of overcrowding situation. We also don't know what the ridership rebound is going to be like. It may not come back to the full 100% as we have in past years, but we know the ridership could conceivably increase, and we want to make sure we have that cushion. So when we were looking at the routes that we reduced service on, for example, if we had a route that operated every 20 minutes, and on each of those trips we had 20 riders, so that's essentially half a bus. And if we went from 3 trips an hour to 2 trips, overall there shouldn't be overcrowding if we reduce that level of service. And that's really what we looked at all different time periods on all the different routes when we were modifying and reducing levels of service. Still providing that access, but reducing the frequency. When it comes to the automatic passenger counters, we have sensors on board the vehicle at both the boarding at the front door and the alighting at the rear door. So we're able to capture this information on all of our buses have the APCs, and we collect data every day, morning, noon, and night. It's not like it's a person taking samples. So we're able to look at the historic data, and over time we have good trends of where the riders were boarding, what locations. Again, it's all based on the sensor data, so we don't know where they're getting off because it's not like they're tapping on and off, but we know where people are boarding the vehicles. So we're able to determine passenger loads based on that APC data that we collect on all of our coaches.
Thank you. That helps a lot. And I do agree with Councilman Dorsey. That background looks kind of cool. So good stuff.
Well, thank you.
Chairman, can I ask one other question?
Of course.
I just wanted to know how we are going about easing any anxiety in the public as it relates to the safety of riding. The cleanliness of the bus, the frequency of of it being cleaned, making certain that the protocols are in place, that there's social distancing, that people are required to wear masks. I think that that probably feeds a lot into whether people are utilizing it and whether they feel comfortable returning to the buses.
It's a fantastic question and something that has been on my mind a lot. Survey after survey of transit agencies is showing that if riders are going to come back, they want to know that they're going to be safe and that the bus is clean. We've done a series of a campaign focused on the cleanliness of our vehicles. I'm happy to send that to you, that we've blasted on social media and tried to get out just about everywhere that we can. We're trying to get out the fact that we are cleaning and sanitizing the buses every single day, doing the same on rail cars, rail stations, wiping things down. I mean, just left and right. I mean, we've spent $27 million on COVID-related expenses of PPE and cleaning vehicles, and we continue to expend those funds. To your point, we could always do a better job of that, right? And I think that that's something that we need to continue to really emphasize. We're starting to get the on the head signs of the buses for it to say, masks required. We are doing surveys weekly of mask wearing compliance. Masks are required on transit vehicles, and we're generally in the 90s, high 90s, just about every week of people wearing masks, and so that's good to see. I can tell you that that's been steadily increasing. But on bus and our rail modes, we've been doing those surveys and getting education out. We also did receive I think it's 96,000 masks from the FTA that we've been handing out at West Baltimore and at other major transit hubs. That we have transit ambassadors handing out those masks because we want folks wearing masks as much as possible. I know that's a big key piece to making people feel safe on buses.
No, thank you for that. And I'm not necessarily advocating this, but when I was doing a little research on it, in Ontario, Canada, they have a program called Ontario Clean, where they actually created an app where people could put in the bus number, and it will it's really transparent. It'll show them, when it was cleaned, how frequently it's cleaned, and so there's just other places that are doing some creative stuff just so people, feel comfortable.
That's great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Vice Chair, I think it's a great, that sounds like a really interesting program. I think a lot of people, be very reassured that kind of transparency and confidence and specific bus by bus accounting like that. Baltimore has seen a less, and just to kind of put a point on everything that was just discussed about getting people all back onto the buses, it should be noted for all that are listening here that article after article has been published that shows that transit is not, to blame for the spread of COVID. That that while there have been, I want to say also maybe particularly kind of right-wing things that have said that like, see, cities are bad. This is why cities are bad, and there are too many people in cities, and transit is the reason why there was this explosion. That just doesn't bear out in the details when you look at some of the world's most transit using and highly populated cities around the world have some of the lowest rates of COVID anywhere. So it just does not bear out in in any factual way. But it is really important for us to continue to give the public as great a reassurance as possible. And here in particular, because we have fared differently than so many other cities in the country. Am I right that, while other cities have seen some transit drop by as much as like 90%, we've seen only 60% drop? Is that correct? I mean, we have, I think that that's right. And that would indicate, I would say pretty clearly, the level of absolute dependency on transit to get everywhere, and the number of people in a city that we're often said to be a meds and eds city, where, look, unfortunately, we have too many people who are paid too little, people who are low-wage workers who are absolutely essential to institutional success. The people changing bed sheets in hospitals, the people maintaining school buildings even while classes are not happening. We have so many essential workers who are absolutely dependent on public transit. We're going to see foreclosure and eviction crisis ahead of us. We're already into some of this. We're going to continue to see businesses struggle and joblessness pervade. And we're going to see more and more people facing greater and greater economic insecurity. And, we should have every reason to believe that means that more people will come to be relying on public transit. I mean, it really is an economic determinant as to why Baltimore City has such high transit ridership, with half of its population unable to access a car at any moment. And so I guess one of the real concerns is cuts to service and cuts to funding, and also, as you mentioned, increased costs for expenditures. How that is going to impact the ability to restore service in the short term or ever. There are the numbers for how much you have incurred increased costs just to address COVID, compounding with how much your funding has been cut. What's it going to take to be able to restore service? And is there a plan for that? Is that is there a real prospect of service being restored? Because I want, look, even where there is lower ridership by comparison, I still want people to be able to get to and from these places where these lines are being truncated. And, I spoke to a parent a couple of days ago. We're going to talk about student stuff in a bit, but, this parent said to me, the line that my kid would take to school has been cut. And the second line that student would get to go to that school, that line has also been cut. So, it's, where are we in terms of thinking about the eventuality of restoration of service?
I think a lot's gonna depend on the funding. I mean, I can't say enough. I talked earlier about our advocacy on the federal level. I think that's going to need to be key. As of right now, the Transportation Trust Fund has been hit pretty hard. The CTP that was released last week took a $3 billion hit. It went from roughly 16 billion to 13 billion. We're at a point where we need the feds to step up. There's been talk of a need for transit funding, and the time for talking is over.
So currently, how much of what MTA has spent since March is money that was already allocated from the Transportation Trust Fund versus CARES Act money? How much of that is, CARES Act money is kind of supplanting previously allocated money?
Yeah, Holly, Holly's been in real in depth with the financial side of things. Holly, are you able to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, Kevin,
can I make this like a little bit more complex? Also, sorry, I know you're going to speak to this and you're going to give a great answer, but I'm also concerned about how MTA is faring again versus other agencies, not just modal agencies, but like, WMATA is not taking the kind of hit that MTA is taking. And I mean, it seems like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but the federal government is highly concentrated around the WMATA service area, and the vast majority of federal workers or huge numbers of federal workers are telecommuting, right? They're working remotely. While we still have so many transit-dependent essential workers. So maybe if you can speak to that in any way.
Yeah, so to your first question, so the 392 million is helping to kind of fill the hole that we have in the Transportation Trust Fund, right? So the revenues that MTA is funded by come from the Transportation Trust Fund. The CARES Act was basically intended to kind of supplant revenues that transit agencies were losing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the majority of our operating funding since January 20th, which is when the funds were eligible, has been provided by the CARES Act. And we're looking to fully expend that later this month. You also asked in terms of like other transit agencies that are having cuts. Kevin can speak to this as well, but Denver is looking at I think 60% cuts that we've heard. New York MTA just proposed, I think, about 40% cuts the other day to their bus service. BART and the San Francisco agencies have been pretty vocal about cuts. And I do believe that WMATA will also, they've been sounding the alarm about their revenue concerns and loss of funding. And so I imagine that unless there's additional federal funding as well, that they will also see some cuts. So this isn't something that's unique to MTA. It is very much an issue with transit agencies across the country. And that's why it's so important that the federal government step up to provide that funding.
And can you speak at all to kind of the way that the intention of the CARES Act is being borne out in terms of operating and capital impacts to the various MDOT modal agencies? I mean, a huge cut to operating expenses for MTA is going to have, an equal cut to SHA is perhaps not going to be felt the same way in terms of day-to-day dependency on buses versus day-to-day dependency on roads for cars or whatever. The operating cut to MTA is going to hurt MTA more than a similar operating cut at SHA, it seems like. Whereas maybe the capital cuts are going to be felt in some different proportion.
I guess I'd just say that I think MDOT tried to take an equitable approach when taking a look at the cuts. I mean, SHA is taking a $1.3 billion capital hit. That's a big hit across the state of Maryland. I think your point's also well taken about the impact of sort of operating on some agencies, the impact there versus operating on other agencies. I understand where you're coming from.
Do we have any other questions from committee members? I also have Brian O'Malley from Central Maryland Transportation Alliance here, and Brian is just such an important partner to me and to my ability to be informed. I want to give Brian an opportunity to ask a couple questions, raise a couple of concerns here. But first, do we have any other questions from the committee members?
Mr. Chair, I want to make certain that I honor the process, but I was just curious, do you think that we should allow Director Quinn to talk about, anything related to the school system so that, when there's subsequent testimony from others, that they don't have to worry about, whether they're talking about school or whether they're talking about not school. I don't think that'll impact us transitioning into the next hearing, but I yield to you.
Let's take I want to give a minute here to Brian because I know he has some non-school concerns, and then we can move right on to we've been here, it's about 4 o'clock, so I want to get Dr. Santelises involved in the conversation pretty quickly here. Brian?
Great, thank you. Thanks for those kind words. MTA, thanks for the presentation. I know these are, I don't know, I imagine these are extremely difficult decisions you're going through. I want to ask, well, first of all, I just want to point out for everyone listening, I heard Administrator Quinn say that the cuts to core bus are about 20% in terms of both service hours and service miles. Just to put that in context, when Baltimore Link took place a couple of years ago, we went and looked at FTA data, and those same two metrics, service miles and service hours, increased by about 5% from 2016 to 2018. One increased by 3%, one increased by 5%. So that was the Baltimore Link change, adding service, but now we're talking about subtracting 20%. So that's just to put that in a little bit of context. And a question I had was, you said that the commuter bus service is being reduced by about 10%. And we know, we've seen demographics of who rides commuter bus versus who rides core bus. And it's quite different in terms of economic, in terms of income, in terms of educational attainment, in terms of race, who's riding each. And, based on the demographics of who's riding commuter bus, you can imagine that people have more alternatives. They might have access to a car, they might be able to telework for their job. And I think that's borne out in the ridership drops. The ridership has gone down much more on commuter bus than on core bus. So it raised, and I looked at the, MDOT put out numbers last Monday about operating savings, and it looked like we're going to save $4 million in fiscal year 21 from the commuter bus changes and $8.6 million in fiscal year 21 from the core bus changes. So, we're canceling 11 core bus routes and 2 commuter bus routes. Why isn't that flip-flopped? Why aren't we canceling more commuter bus routes and preserving more of the core bus?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brian. I mean, I guess I'd start by noting that there's a lot less commuter bus service than there is core bus service. If you take a look at it, whether it's hours or miles of passengers, and so we are cutting a couple routes and making some severe trip reductions on 20 other routes. So I understand your point. I think we've tried to look at it from those same principles that we looked at the core bus standpoint, from an equity perspective and an efficiency perspective. And we're looking forward to getting public comment on that as well. I hear your comment.
Thanks. Mr. Chair, is there time for one more question in this round?
Yeah, let's go for one more, Brian.
The other one, I think this came up before, but we're looking at the the numbers released last week and trying to figure out the change in operating budget to the different modal administrations. And not just the overall change, but looking at the state contribution. And it looks to us like MTA is seeing a much bigger hit on the state contribution to its operating budget than State Highway Administration, Ports Administration, Motor Vehicle Administration, Aviation Administration, the other modal administrations under MDOT. And so that looks like we're sort of it's sort of negating the intent, Congress's intent in providing public transportation aid around the country to keep transit operating. And I hear you, both you and Holly pointed out that around the country, other agencies are proposing cuts, but it seems like we're running out of CARES Act funds faster. And that may be because we are taking state dollars that were programmed to MTA and moving them to other modal administrations. Am I wrong in that? That's, we're trying to do the math with the numbers we saw last week, and that's what it looks like to us.
So I don't know about moving, money around to other administrations. I mean, I guess I would just note that we do have the largest operating budget. And so there's the largest kind of pot of operating budget to take from is from MTA. And, one of the charts that we showed it as a percent basis of that TVU's operating budget. And so I don't know that it's out of proportion necessarily with the other modes. And I guess I'd say similarly on the capital budget, you'll note that SHA took the biggest hit because it has the largest capital budget. And so I think that was the approach that was taken.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to, we kind of got a pin in the parking lot or whatever, however you say in corporate speak, on the future impacts on trippers for schools. So I know we're going to come back to that, but I want to bring up Dr. Centelisas and the folks who have been very patiently waiting from BCPS. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to get them going with their presentation. Are we going to hand over screen sharing to you, or does Jennifer have your presentation? What are we doing?
It would be great if you could hand over, because our Chief Operating Officer and I are tag teaming today. So I'd appreciate that, Councilman, if that's possible.
Okay, great. So we need to make, we need to give hosting to Lynette.
Yes, sir.
It's done.
Okay, great.
Fabulous. So is that the official handoff?
Is that Jennifer?
Yes, she has been made presenter, Lynette Washington.
Okay, great.
Fabulous. So as we get started, Chief Washington, Dr. Washington, are you all right? Because I can't tell whether it's up yet or not.
I cannot tell. I'm going to put it up.
Great.
And turn my. So is everyone able to see the presentation?
No, down at the bottom of your screen, you've got some options for mute, for your audio, for your video, and then right next to that, you've got your share content button.
Okay, this is a new
and if you click that, you'll get a tray of a bunch of different, all the windows that you have on your screen. You can just choose the one that you're gonna, you can choose, I guess, your PowerPoint application as the one to share. You don't need to share your whole background and all that.
Okay. And so is that working yet? No.
We have a gray screen here.
There
we go.
There we go.
There you go.
You got it. Great good coaching, Councilman Dorf. All righty. So would you like me to begin, sir?
Love it. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Centelisas.
Sure. No, thank you, Chairman Dorsey and all the members of the Transportation Committee. Both Dr. Washington and I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss transportation in the midst of a pandemic. Also want to start out by thanking our colleagues at the MTA for their presentation and really their ongoing partnership in this work. And just want to emphasize that they really have been partners in this work. And so we are hopeful and expecting that that will continue. But just as you did, Councilman Dorsey, Chairman, to really make sure that folks know that, and that we too understand some of the fiscal challenges that the state is facing, that MTA is facing, and that quite frankly, we in Baltimore City schools are facing, very much like the city. But as we get going, I think what would be helpful is to be able to first share, I'll share some of our operating principles, our core principles, and then turn it over to Chief Washington to help walk us through some of the particulars about transportation. So I think it's important to just kind of briefly share with regard to district-wide opening some core principles that continue to ground the work that we're doing both within transportation specifically, but also with regards to reopening of schools at a variety of phases in the fall and throughout the school year. You'll see a heavy emphasis on health and safety. That's our central focus. It has been a continual focus in all of our feedback from families, from staff, from the overall public. And so part of really what one of our drivers is how do we continue to ensure student and staff safety within the learning environment, and in this case, on the way to and from the learning environment via transportation, given the constraints with COVID-19. We did very early on really develop a lot of these plans, decisions in collaboration with parents, staff, a variety of stakeholders. What you'll see here is the 3 phases of our framework. Phase 1 being virtual learning, that is pretty much where we are now. We started yesterday virtually. And I just want to point out that phase 1 might also include some small groups of students in person as conditions permit. You may, the City Council knows in previous contexts, I've referenced some of the work that we have done over the summer that was quite successful in bringing small groups of students back for in-person learning. And the families and staff that participated in that are a great example of 100% virtual with opportunities for small groups. I would also say some of our plans in collaboration with Rec and Parks to open up student learning centers also would exemplify this phase 1. Phase 2 would be medium-term recovery. That is a mix of in-person and virtual, but always maintaining an option to continue 100% virtual even through the time when we would enter phase 2. And then phase 3 is the new normal, with which would be the phase where we would enter clearly when it's safe for a majority of in-person learning. So the shifts within the pandemic situation really have pushed us to align all of our transportation considerations to those 3 phases. Again, we have taken feedback initially from external stakeholders about transportation, but as we've noted on a number of occasions, this slide shows the 16 work groups that drove the initial planning. That is in addition to the work we know we will need to do on an ongoing basis to solicit feedback, information for adjustments and shifts that need to occur. This slide is really exemplifying that. Okay, and then before I turn it over to Dr. Washington, I do just want to say that, again, we too are taking into account, as you will see when Dr. Washington takes over, the longer term considerations of safety within the various phases, but also the fiscal impact of that work and that preparation as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Washington, who will continue with more specifics for you, Chairman, as well as the rest of the committee and public. Dr. Washington.
So I just want to say good evening to everyone, and thank you. I want to echo Dr. Santelises in thanking the committee for allowing us to present, and also for the partnership that we currently have with the MTA. It's been very helpful during this process. So for this presentation, I'm going to walk very briefly through some of what our yellow bus transportation looks like, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about our partnership and how we've been working with MTA, and then also some of the impacts to the MTA service cuts. So just a brief overview is that we transport a number of students. 9,000 students are actually transported by yellow bus services, and the other 29,000 students are transported by MTA. So MTA is basically transporting about 70% of our students, and we transport the other 20% of our students with in-house bus drivers and also with contractual services. In terms of things that we are doing as it related to COVID and health and safety protocols, is that on our yellow buses, we are mandating face masks for our students and also for our staff, and then also face shields in those situations where students are not able to wear masks. We're also doing regular and intensified cleaning. Most of the cleaning is happening every day, and then during the weekends have more deep cleaning. We're training our staff on all health and safety protocols. We have a district-wide SOP, standard operating procedure document, and so staff are being trained on those different protocols as it relates to transportation. We have a 1 student per seat wherever possible, and so in situations where there are students coming from the same family, then that's the only period where we're allowing for 2 students per seat, but we're implementing the 1 student per seat in order for social distancing. And then the other piece that we should just mention is that we are being very restrictive about students being eligible for transportation. So there may be other instances where we've previously transported students because they were a sibling or for other reasons that was not related to eligibility, but because we are enforcing and implementing social distancing on our buses, we will not have a lot of capacity for additional students. One of the things I also wanted to just mention is that during this process of getting feedback from families, Dr. Santelises and also other leadership in city schools ran town hall meetings where we received feedback from our staff, and then also we received feedback from the general public stakeholders. And there were a couple of things that were consistent themes within the feedback. And the first one was a lot of families were very concerned about delays on routes for our students. And so this was not only for our yellow buses, but also for our students that were using MTA. The other thing that they were also pretty concerned about was MTA social distancing, our students basically missing routes. Some of the concerns that was brought up earlier today during MTA's presentation is also some of the concerns that our families, that buses would pass by our students as they're waiting. And then the last one was the lack of access to our school sites, particularly during our phase 1 where we're in virtual, where students need to have access not only just for food, but picking up instructional material and also for Chromebooks. So that was another concern. So as we talk about some of the work and engaging with MTA on our plan, right now we're in between this preparation, but we're also in virtual learning. So there has been, a need for additional feedback, particularly from families as they're experiencing service cuts from MTA, and then also preliminary bus tripper, the tripper bus assignments is something that's important, even though it's not affecting us so much within the virtual learning period. It is going to have significant effects within hybrid. But with virtual learning, we need to make sure that our students still are able to access our meal sites, that our students are able to have access when we also, if there's a potential and opportunity to go to the small group in-person meetings, our students will need access to that. And then there's going to be further need once we go into hybrid, when a number of our students are coming back into buildings. So I wanted to also, one of the challenges that we have after the announcement was made was our team was looking for how do we assess impact to our students. And one of the ways we assess impact is looking at data. And so I just want to thank Tom for meeting with our team and looking at some of the data, or talking through data opportunities and opportunities that we can partner together in looking at the data to understand what our student impacts were. And a lot of our concern is from a report that was done by the Baltimore Education Research Consortium. It's our research partner, and they did a report using data from 2014 and 2015, looking at just current MTA service impact on our students and how our students were experiencing the MTA, their routes to school. And some of the flags were the fact that our students do have longer route times. The estimated times for our students to travel from home to school is a longer period when we compare it to other urban areas. 2/3 of our high school students are mainly dependent on public transit. And because they're not doing a straight route from home to school on one particular route, there's a lot of transfers that happen. So it's very complicated for them. And one of the things that was a summary of the research was that every additional 10-minute increase in commute time has a negative impact on our students that lead to absenteeism or them transferring to other schools just because they just don't have a good route to get to school. So those were concerns that we want to flag on the front end, because we definitely are making assumptions right now on what the impacts will be. I think that as follow-up next step analysis for the district is to get access to student ridership data. It's going to allow us to run scenarios to understand what parts of the city our students are impacted, where in terms of schools, specific school sites where they impacted, so that we can be in a better position to advocate for our students during this time period where the proposal is live for people to provide feedback and response. And so that is our presentation.
Thank you.
This has raised a number of questions for me, but I'd like to hand it over at this point to the Vice Chair, Councilman Pinkett, as he brought the resolution forth to call this hearing. I'd like to kind of put him in the lead here, if that's okay with you, Vice Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman Dorsey, and thank you, Dr. Washington, for the presentation. That presentation is scary. Just thinking about the impact or potential impacts on our young people, when you move towards the hybrid or, a total return to class. And I guess what I'd like to hear more, I guess would be two things, and maybe Director Quinn can speak to it. I know that one of the things he said in his earlier presentation was that the trippers would be maintained, but trippers as we know it won't be adequate if we adhere to the social distancing and even as we talk about the commute times, both to and from school. So I want to hear more about what does that commitment to the trippers mean? Does it mean a commitment to it, under this new paradigm that we're operating under? And then also, if we can pull back up the slide that expressed both the student and parent concerns, can we talk a little bit about the pathway to addressing some of those concerns?
Councilman, would you like me to kind of go first and kind of respond?
Yes, please.
Okay, so, number of issues. I kind of just want to respond to a few things that were brought up, including your question. So, first, I just want to note that I absolutely appreciate the partnership with Baltimore City Public School System. They're great. They had a great. My staff was telling me about a great meeting they had the other day. So know that we are meeting and talking regularly, and those are conversations that are happening. And within our budgetary constraints, we want to partner as much as we can. And so it's going to be a delicate dance. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be delicate. And but we're committed to working together on that. I want to note that because we're a public transit agency, there are federal regulations around how we build our system and how we serve the public. And so I just want to note that there are federal regulations that sort of prohibit us from acting as a school bus, say a yellow bus provider. So for example, those fixed routes, those trippers that we're talking about, we're required by law to allow anybody on the public to board those. We cannot say, Baltimore City Public School students only may ride. We can't do that. Federal law prohibits that. I want to note on the trippers piece that there are 27 schools today that have trippers, and that includes a certain number of revenue hours and revenue miles, and we are committed to providing that same number of revenue hours and revenue miles. So there may be trippers off of different routes than are provided today. That may be better for some kids, that may be worse for some kids, and I think in working with Baltimore City Public School System to understand that will be really important. Face masks are required for all students and our operators as well, so that's something that we discussed earlier. As it relates to all the middle schools and high schools that we serve, there are 113 city schools in the service area. And I do want to note that 109 will still have service within a quarter mile. The other 4 will still, there are 4 that drop off that, and we're committed to providing those with that tripper service. As BCPSS moves to a hybrid model, I think we have a lot of questions of what that looks like. So, imagine that students are separated up into an A group and a B group. And maybe the A group is going to, certain school on Monday and Tuesday, and the B group is going on Thursday and Friday. Those kids may live in very different geographic parts of town, the A group and the B group. You may need a set of trippers from one location geographically on one side on Monday and Tuesday, and a completely different set of trippers from another side of town on Thursday and Friday. And so I think the key to getting through this is going to be communication and partnership and working together to share the resources that we have, and be quite frank, giving us as much lead time as possible to try to make adjustments in our systems. We have collective bargaining agreements and all kinds of stuff that hamper our ability to move as nimbly as we might want to. And again, working with the superintendent to understand their data, where kids are living, where they're going under a school's choice program, and how that changes every year. And again, that hybrid model, it's going to be complicated, and I think communication is going to really need to be the key.
Yes, Councilman Pinkett, is it all right if I just kind of...
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree that I do think that it's going to be absolutely crucial to make sure that the communication is there, that we are working very closely. I think our hybrid plan has frankly been out for a while, and I think we can begin there in terms of what we're thinking about. Clearly, there'll need to be adjustments made just because that's the time we're living in. But I do think the hybrid plan that we submitted a few weeks ago is a good place to start in the discussion. The second piece I would say from our end that would be incredibly helpful is actually having more specific data from MTA about ridership. I do remember when I was an area superintendent in Boston, we were able to get point A, point B. That's my terminology, not transportation speak, so forgive me. We were able to get that level of data, and I think that's been a piece that's been missing for us, that if we had, it would actually really help in being able to fully recognizing that that you guys have to make rough decisions. And as somebody who also has to make rough decisions, very sensitive to that, but I think working together will allow us to also see which routes are the most traveled to which schools from which segments across the city, and that kind of So when I've asked my team for that data that I'm used to looking at in other jurisdictions, it's been harder to get that. And it would help us a lot if, as part of the communication, we could also get to some data sharing, because if not, I think we're going to be overly reliant on using our own analysis for the data that might not reflect all that you have too. And so I think data sharing agreements I would just offer up are also a real critical point to the planning moving forward.
I'd like to jump in with a related thought here. Understanding where students are coming from, where they're going, can be really critical for those who are not a one-seat ride. I'm really lucky that in the good old days when I was going to City Hall regularly, instead of sitting in this same chair for 12 hours a day every day, I had a one-seat ride from 2 blocks from my house to the backside of City Hall. And I know that the experience of a one-seat ride is just incomparable to ever having to transfer in a system. And one of the things that I've been a big proponent of is improving our multimodalism within our bigger picture of transit and transportation network and system. And so I want us to also be talking, because we do have folks from DOT here, and I want to hear how DOT is and has been involved in conversations with BCPS and MTA during this time. And one of the things that I want us to be really cognizant of as like a potential is finding ways to increase cycling access for those students who may have a 2-seat ride and can eliminate one of them by biking one leg of that route to a bus, or taking a bus to a leg of a route that they could bike the rest of the way, and eliminate that transfer from their experience. And so I think it's really important for us to be talking about the safety of the streets for cycling around schools and in those communities, and on the arterial roads and on the collector roads near those schools, as well as in the communities. And that's where it's really important for us to have this data sharing and a clear understanding of where students are coming from, where they're going, so that in our collaborative work with DOT, we can be talking about where DOT should be strategically prioritizing some of the striping and the great work that they've been doing recently in increasing striping, which I also know has been one of the things that's getting kind of shifted as MTA is making these very difficult decisions in some of the projects that were kind of coming down the pike here that involved more multimodal kind of streetscape changes as part of MTA. Now the city is going to take full charge, for example, of striping bus lanes or painting bus lanes. So I want us to be talking about that as well. So I'm just kind of throwing that in there. I'm going to throw it back to Councilman Pinkett unless anybody has any particular comments in response to that.
If I can, I don't have a comment to that, but I guess as we move forward, I really don't have any other questions, but this hearing, both on MTA in general and then as it relates to the school system, I just think was a critical conversation for us to be having, especially as we think about the health and safety of our young people. And I do want to state that I have full confidence in the leadership of MTA and our school system with Dr. Santelises and Director Quinn, that they and their teams will get together and get this right. Because Dr. Santelises can make the most healthy school environment possible, but she has no control over the buses. And if the children aren't protected coming to the school and leaving the school, then everything that they put in place in the school system will be for naught, because that environment will be corrupted by what happens, because we know that that's the transportation source for our young people. And so I'm glad that this conversation has happened, continues to happen. And I just hope that the information that's necessary, that needs to be shared in order for this plan to be in place, because our kids will go back to a in-school environment eventually of some sort, and we just need to be ready for them. So thank you, Chairman. I might have other questions later, but I don't have any other questions right now. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Bullock?
Chair, no questions at this point, but again, I appreciate everything school system, Dr. Santelises, and MTA is doing. So thanks for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Doc. I want to engage, because Councilman Pinkett's resolution did call for us to have MTA, BCPS, and City DOT here, and we do have Liam Davis with us and Charles Penny, and I'm not sure if we have anybody else. I see we have Toby Goodwin on here. I just want to see if they have anything to add to the conversation here. Liam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer, if it's possible, could you pull up our PowerPoint that we also sent over? We have a very brief PowerPoint. It's like 5 slides.
Hold on 1 second, please.
Okay, thank you.
While we're waiting, because we do have 62 participants here, I want to make sure that those who are tuned in here know that I am going to take some public testimony here in a bit, and I will just kind of go over kind of the rules of engagement as we get to that. But I don't want folks to jump off if they're tuning in here. I really appreciate people tuning in here, because it's really important for us to have the public engaged to whatever degree is possible, under this virtual circumstance or whatever, because you're really important to our ability to further the conversation and get more people engaged in public comment, and giving this critical feedback to all of the partner agencies here. So I just really want to express my thanks to everybody who's tuned in here, and I'm gonna ask you for public comment shortly. Thank you. Go ahead, Liam, take it away.
We can go to okay, here we go. So thanks, everybody. I just want to let everyone know who we got from DOT with us today. Obviously, I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager for City DOT. We're also joined by Charles Penny, who's our Transit Bureau Chief. We're joined by Toby Goodwin, who is our Safety Division Chief, and Monica White, who recently joined Baltimore City DOT from MTA and is our Transit Service Administrator. Next slide. So what I'll do is I'll run through this, just general information, and then if there's any specific questions, I think Charles, Toby, and Monica are going to be great resources for the more specific answers. So this next slide kind of talks about how DOT, kind of how our services tie into schools and transportation. We are a partner with Baltimore City Public Schools and MTA on a number of things. But some glaring examples are the City School Crossing Guard program operates out of Baltimore City DOT Safety Division, so that's under Toby's shop. The Charm City Circulator, our Harbor Connector, the Baltimore Water Taxi, and our Dockless Scooter program. All of those are, utilized by students when it makes sense for them to use it. I like what really comes to mind in terms of, the circulator usage and even the Harbor Connector would be students who go to like Digital Harbor High School. But even in work that we've done, traffic calming measures we've worked with the school system on along Harford Road at the new high school, I believe that's Reach Academy, could be wrong there. But my understanding is that the feedback we got from the principal at that school was the dockless scooter program was utilized by a number of those students there. Obviously, that's kind of skewing to the more high school age kids. So when we look at DOT and the 2020-2021 school year, one of the things, so just as a general summary, we have approximately 231 traffic guards who are ready to be deployed. Should schools resume in-person learning, they'll be ready to go, and they're hired and on staff. The Charm City Circulator has instituted a new weekday schedule with service ending at 8 p.m. now instead of 11 p.m. Rear entrance boarding is now standard for all circulator buses. This was done to try and reduce exposure to circulator staff and drivers. We can go to the next slide. This Charm City Circulator buses are required to be sanitized a minimum of 2 times per day. All riders are required to wear a mask or a face covering, similar to what MTA and the school system has said. And then all circulator buses are expected to have driver shields installed by the end of the calendar year 2020. And again, I think, Councilman, you hit the nail on the head in terms of what DOT is doing. It's less directly related to school transportation, but it does impact school transportation. But a lot of our striping work that we're doing, our continued rollout of the Complete Streets Ordinance, walkability, encouraging bike use, all of these are critical elements. All these are critical steps that are going to help the city and our citizens and our teachers and our students and their families navigate these times of scarcity that have impacted MTAs and ours and the school system's ability to deliver some services. So that's really all we have. We made it really brief because we knew this was a busy day. But if the members of the council, members of the committee have any questions, Charles, Toby, and Monica, and myself are here to address any specific questions.
Thank you, Liam. Again, you hit on that issue of scarcity, and I just want to come back to my earlier point that people are going to continue to be hit economically by COVID and by the fallout of COVID. And it's really, more important than ever that we prioritize our facilitation, our accommodating of mode share for the most economically feasible modes of transportation. I remind people pretty regularly that it costs about $9,000 per year to own a car on average, to own and operate a car. I bought my bike in 2004 for $250, and I'm still riding that same bike. And we really, we've seen with places like Lake Montebello now closed off to cars, it's as clear as ever that when we make it safe for people to engage in active transportation, that they engage in it at higher numbers. Baltimore is not unique. That's not new. This is borne out everywhere around the world. Paris is talking about the 15-minute city where, it's like overnight, just explosions of huge numbers of people engaging in active transportation because the city prioritizes it. So I want to make sure and just ask directly, is DOT having this conversation about data sharing with MTA and with city schools to understand where students are coming from and where they're going in terms of home and schools? And is that being factored at all into our decision about how to ramp up and prioritize where we're making it safer for students? And I have a related question. I want to know, you hit on this. You said, obviously scooters are going to skew in their usage toward high school age students. But I guess I want to ask city schools, Dr. Washington, you talked about for every 10 minutes longer that a commute takes, there's a correlating dropout or transfer or absenteeism rate that occurs. And so I want to make sure that if we're seeing that's a factor in also where we're saying, look, we can eliminate that 10 minutes or 20 minutes of a ride or of a commute if we're making it more possible for students in that age bracket where the drop-off starts to occur, if we're prioritizing that part of their ride for active transportation where possible. So can we have a little conversation about that?
I would say that we can definitely do more of a partnership with DOT in terms of some data sharing. We partner with DOT around our 21st century school sites and a number of other different places. So I think that we can definitely look at this in a little bit more detail to see where we can have better results for our students.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Monica White. I did want to just share that we have had several conversations with the MTA for data sharing to analyze the changes to the upcoming pending changes and how that will affect the circulator service routes and where we can do some analysis to see how that could affect our routes, our riders, and where we may need to make some updates in the future to ensure that, as you said, where there were taking away that overlap, that maybe we'll be able to make some updates to be able to take in some of those additional riders. So the information, it is ongoing data exchange there.
And also, we haven't had any conversation about like school streets. The city's got this design for distancing program along business main streets. That's kind of spearheaded by the Baltimore Development Corporation. DOT has created this slow streets program through the ordinance that was put forth by Council President Scott, where we are, trying to slow down cars on streets with some pretty basic elements there. But the principle being that we can be repurposing public space for more deliberate usage in other ways. And so, we could be creating thinking about this hybrid stage 2 of when more kids are coming to schools or the new norm, creating possibly like school streets for around schools as well as remote learning centers. Has that come up as a part of conversation at this point yet?
This is Charles Penny. I know we do have safe routes. This is Charles Penny with DOT, Chairman. We do have safe routes to school. We haven't worked with the school system with regards to some type of satellite facilities for learning, though.
Mentioned, Councilman, there's been some, and this is just like an anecdotal observation, but we have had some complaints from some private schools about the placement of barriers for our Slow Streets program and how that impacts their school drop-off areas. So I think part of this is really going to require a more robust public outreach in terms of getting folks to understand what this is and what this is all about. And I think that's one of the best things about the ordinance that came out of the city council was after we achieved that 25-mile minimum of slow streets, then DOT shifts into an evaluation period. And that's a great suggestion to kind of see how we can incorporate this program into promoting our existing efforts that Charles just brought up, which is safe routes to school.
I have neglected to ask the law department to share their bill report here on the resolution, so I'm going to take a moment here to call on Victor Turvola from the law department. I apologize, Victor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The law department, as usual, when we have this type of investigation or hearing, had really no comment other than to say this is the proper way of engaging in this type of conversation.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, great. Thanks, Vic. Well, I want to go to some public testimony now. Is this cool? I'm in charge here, but I'm asking you for fun, I guess. All right, so we've got some folks who are logged in here via the WebEx platform, and we have a number of people who may be on the phone. If you are on the WebEx platform, then down in the bottom right of the participants list, you have a button there for raise hand. And I would ask that if you are on the WebEx platform and that you use that raise hand function to indicate that you would like to provide public testimony. And if I see your hand there, I will call on you. And if I don't, I'm not going to call on you. And I am going to go to folks on the phone because we have a number of folks who are identified on the phone as just simply, caller number 1, caller number 2, and they don't have a raise hand function. So I'm going to go down them one by one and ask for them. So first, I'm going to look at our attendees here to see if we have anybody with their hands raised. All right, I just saw Timothy Sandoval's hand go up, so let's go to Timothy Sandoval. I believe you can, unmute yourself.
Hello. Hey, I just wanted to comment as a member of Sunrise Movement Baltimore that we're pretty deeply concerned about these cuts because we think that they're going to hurt communities of color the most and potentially undermine people's trust in public transportation. We just also think that, there's a potential that this could lead to more car usage over time that leads to harmful emissions that, cause climate change and other, health issues. So we hope that city leaders and transportation officials will keep pushing the state, leaders to ensure that these cuts aren't made. There's a broader context here that we think needs to enter this conversation, that state officials and politicians have prioritized roads and public transit systems over public transportation. And, we think that that's a problem. And as young people who are trying to, build a future in the city, we find that unacceptable. So we plan to keep raising our voices about this and, appreciate the comments and testimony today.
Thank you, Timothy. Matthew McClay, you can unmute yourself. And Timothy, you can put down your hand in the raise hand thing.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for having this opportunity for public testimony and for discussing these issues. I just want to echo, I am completely against these cuts. I appreciate the care that has been taken to handle a very tough situation the best way possible, but I really think it's disgraceful to use the pandemic as an excuse to defund a public service. And I understand, we're all struggling during a pandemic, and in particular, the most vulnerable members of our communities are struggling. And I think in times like this, people need to be able to rely on their public services like transportation more than ever. So I really feel that, essential workers and people of color are uniquely targeted by cuts to public transit, in particular during the pandemic. And, I just think it's to make those cuts now when people are suffering the most. It's a really terrible and hard thing. So I hope that we can do everything in our power to fight against this and do our best to do that. So yeah, and I also echo with what Timothy said, just that this is sort of the most recent attack on Baltimore City public transit, in particular by, I think, state administrations. I feel that Baltimore City is systematically underfunded in public transit, and I personally will not tolerate more cuts to Baltimore's transit budget. And I would love to see the creation of a local or Baltimore Regional Transit Authority that would give Baltimore control of its own transportation system. So I feel very strongly about this. And again, I thank you all for your hard work in having this conversation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Melissa Schober, you can unmute yourself. And Matthew, you can put your hand down. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep. Hi, Melissa.
Sorry, took a second. I'm here today representing the Parent and Community Advisory Board for Baltimore City Public Schools and wanted to read our statement. The Parent and Community Advisory Board for Baltimore City Public Schools is deeply concerned with the proposed cuts scheduled to take effect January 3rd to the Maryland Transportation Administration. MTA has proposed service cuts that would truncate 25% of city link routes and eliminate 36% of local link routes. Baltimore is a district with very limited yellow bus service, in which 35% of our students rely on MTA for transportation to school. Students as young as 11 years old daily board MTA to reach geographically distant and limited programs, such as Ingenuity and Advanced Academics. Baltimore City is a choice district in which there are no zoned high schools. 6 in 10 high schoolers rely on MTA to reach their high school each day, and doing so is no small feat. A 2017 report found that the average student commute to high school using public transportation is estimated to take over 30 minutes each way. The proposed cuts would eliminate or truncate routes that carry thousands of students to school. For example, the local link 38 would end, and with it, single route service from West Baltimore to Poly and Western high schools. This in a city in which 50% of households lack access to a private vehicle and chronic absenteeism is high. These cuts will reinforce the de facto school segregation of Baltimore City schools by further limiting the ability of poor, Black, and Brown students to attend school and participate in career and technical education opportunities. It will limit dual enrollment, in which students are able to earn college credit, even as research shows that dual enrollment participants are more likely to enroll and persist in college, earn higher GPAs during college, and accumulate more college credit. The Parent and Community Advisory Board calls upon the leadership within Baltimore City Schools and the city delegation to act to ensure that our children can safely and equitably access daily school transportation. They deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. I know you're speaking here kind of on behalf of PCAB, but I also want to just recognize how important your voice is in our community on so many issues, particularly related to students, just as an individual. So just thank you. I appreciate you taking your time to be here with us today. Oh, I see Jed Weeks. Jed Weeks has his hand up. Jed Weeks, you're up.
Thank you, Councilman. I just wanted to echo the comments from the Sunrise Movement and from Melissa. We're obviously concerned about these cuts that are going to disproportionately harm Black Baltimoreans and people who can't afford cars. And I also had like a question and then a comment. One question I didn't necessarily hear, and I got in the hearing a little bit late, so I'm sorry. Did MTA analyze destinations like doctor's offices, particularly like pediatricians in these routes? I mean, I know they're still focusing on serving major hospitals, but doctors' offices are spread out throughout the city, and people still rely on public transportation to get to those doctors' offices, to get their kids vaccinations and other things like that. So I'm just worried that we might be cutting off transportation access to doctors' offices. And then the second clarification I just wanted to say about school streets and other like street reclamation like that, it's less about safe routes to school and it's more about repurposing space for physically distanced outdoor learning or play, where school grounds may otherwise lack that adequate space. So it's like we don't have room for a physically distanced playground, or we don't have enough outdoor space for an outdoor classroom, so we close down a parking lot or we close down a street to create that space. And that's something that could also be done outside of like libraries or other places where we're trying to prioritize internet access. So I'm hoping people will, work together to try to prioritize that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jed. I appreciate you helping me reiterate that the second point there. It really isn't just about safe routes to schools. It really is about making use and making deliberate choices about use of public space for very intentional purposes, like creating internet access opportunity and such as Jed just mentioned. I want to kind of relay that question to MTA about doctor's offices and assessments. I do first want to acknowledge it looks like we've just been joined by my colleague from the 1st District, Zeke Cohen, who also chairs the Youth and Education Committee. And so I just want to ask if he has anything to add to the conversation here. Hi, Zeke.
Hey, Councilman Dorsey, Chairman Dorsey. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to Councilman Pinkett for calling for it. Want to, of course, reiterate much of what we've heard, which is when we cancel bus routes or postpone commute times, it dramatically impacts academic outcomes for our children. We already suffer from learning loss because kids are persistently tardy because it can take them 2 hours to get to school. So just to say that this has very, very real consequences on children and families who are already stressed and who are already trying to make it work under challenging circumstances. So again, really appreciate you holding the hearing and looking forward to being able to say to our governor, who, look, at the end of the day, MTA is responsible to the legislature and to Governor Hogan. And so, while we are expressing frustration to Mr. Quinn and others today, ultimately it's our governor who has shortchanged Baltimore City, both through the cancellation of the Red Line, the really disorganized rollout of the links program, and now this, which again further devastates our kids and our families. So again, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Collins. Excuse me. MTA, do you have anything to add about the kind of the assessment of doctors' offices and healthcare?
Sure. So I'll just note that we did analyze hospitals and medical centers, but not sort of a standalone doctor's office. If there's a data set that's out there that we can grab, happy to do that analysis as well. But I know that for our initial analysis and taking a look at access, we primarily focus on hospitals and medical centers.
Thank you. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here is go to some of these people on the phone. I don't see, well, I did see one more hand just go up here. Bong Del Rosario.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, how are you doing?
I'm good. So I actually have more of a question, and probably to Kevin. So I'm from MDOD, the Director of Transportation Policy, and my question is, I didn't hear too much about what type of effect these cuts would have on MTA Mobility Link. So I'm just curious on what type of effects or what type of if there's any type of prevention that might, be in place or in talks about, possibly not having, MTA link affected by MTA mobility link affected by these changes. And I know on the website, I believe it's like a year after these changes go into effect, that it would affect MTA mobility. But I was just curious on to see, if there were any other talks of possibly not affecting MTA mobility, because there's a lot of people with disabilities and elderly that rely on, mobility, and because of these cuts and the service interruptions, aren't going to be able to get to, like we were just talking about, like you were just talking about, doctor's appointments and other treatments, rehab centers, and so forth.
It's a good question, Kevin.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, just some background. We our mobility paratransit service. We're required by the Americans with Disabilities Act to provide complimentary paratransit service within a 3/4 mile buffer of any of our fixed routes. And so it's a good question, because as fixed routes go away, that requirement goes away. So just some numbers quickly of the analysis that we've done. Sitting here today, we have about 26,000 mobility paratransit riders. In that 3/4 mile buffer of fixed routes that go away, there's about 1,100 active riders in that area that would no longer be served. Of those, about 1,150, about 1,100 will have access to other services like Baltimore County Ride, Howard County, and Anne Arundel County Transit. Our analysis is showing us that Baltimore City does have 37 mobility riders who would lose access, as they'd lose eligibility in terms of not living in that 3/4 mile buffer anymore. So that's 37 riders. Our proposal takes a look at and proposes offering 1 year of continued mobility and call a ride service after the January 3rd, 2021 implementation. And so folks in that kind of buffer area, that roughly 1,150 people, would have that service through January of 2022.
Thanks, Kevin. I think this really underscores the difficulty of the job that you have in determining these service changes, and how many layers and layers of consideration and federal and state law you really have to be considering how to adhere to. So I just really want to commend MTA on just, being up to the task, particularly under your leadership. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to go to these call-in users. It looks like we have just 3 of them, and I can't. I don't have a name for you, and calling out your number or your user number here isn't going to make much of a difference. So I'm going to ask Jennifer Coates to unmute you one by one as I call you out. I can see the first 6 digits of your phone number, so I'm going to use that. So, and when you are unmuted, you will hear 2 beeps. And that's your indication that you have been unmuted. So just listen up for that. The first person is caller whose phone number begins with 410215.
At this time, I do not have a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for listening in. Next is caller beginning at 443642. You have been unmuted. Call in user number 16 with the phone number beginning 443642. Going once, going twice. All right. Final call in user here beginning with the number 410845. You have been unmuted. Going once. Going twice. Okay. With that, I want to say again, I just really appreciate everybody's participation here, both as presenters and the public attendees listening in. I would love to hear any feedback also that anybody wants to email me. I'm easy to find, ryan.dorsey@baltimorecity.gov. If you have any comments about today's hearing, I'd love to hear them. And if there's anything that I can pass along, I'd be glad to pass that along to the relevant folks. And with that, thank you, Vice Chair Pinkett, for bringing up this resolution and really lighting a fire under me to just get MTA teed up to come in here and talk about these service changes. Thank you so much to BCPS, DOT, and Councilman Bullock and everybody that's been on here with us today. This committee is now in recess. Thank you.
Thank you.